Welcome back to the channel. Today I have a brand new charger parts car. So I needed a wiring harness, an interior wiring harness from a charger that had collision avoidance as well as the rear parking sensors. And this car has it. So as you guys have seen, I've already pulled the front engine bay harness from this car, but now I have the whole harness. And I would have used my silver charger wiring harness, but the issue with that is when I stripped the car, I left it in the car. It's been weathered for about a year. So it's been rained on, snowed on, it's been baked in the sun. Wiring with weather and water and just sitting in water over time is always not a good combination. So this car is relatively new and all the wiring has been kind of concealed from the element. Down here we have the wheel speed for the rear, both of them. And then this car actually came with the collision avoidance and the parking sensors. So my silver one didn't have the collision avoidance, but it had the parking sensors. So this will be a lot better because then I don't have to find the plug and add all that stuff to it. So to get the wiring harness out, as you guys remember with my Challenger Hellcat, you pretty much have to strip everything out of this thing to get it because it's all one body harness. It goes inside, outside, it goes up into the headliner, it goes into the trunk. It's not a very friendly wiring harness, but what we're gonna do is pull all this stuff out of the car first. I've already done the dash, so that's gonna be super easy. And then just pull the seats out, the rear seat, pretty much everything that's inside, drop the headliner down, drop the skin off the trunk or the little cover off the trunk, and just get everything and pull the rear bumper off and get all that stuff out, get the wiring harness out. I finally have everything stripped out of the charger and the wiring harness is now out. So I'm very excited about this harness being out. It was a ton of work to get this out of the car. You pretty much have to pull everything apart to get these out. And on this car, how it was hit, usually if they're in a front end collision, it breaks. If they have automatic rails, it breaks the little, they have like these little tiny thin wire things. Let me see if I can find one. I was using one to move them after I got the seat off. So these little things, see how it gets twisted like that? Once it's twisted like that, it won't move the rail back and forth. So then you have to pull the seats off of the rail separately and then manually move the rails back to get the bolts. So it was just an extra step that I had to do, which took probably an extra 2 hours. So everything's out of here. Wiring is out. So the reason, like I said, I needed this wiring harness was to get everything for the rear of the car, tail lights, all that stuff back there. So this is nice. It's not weathered. Nothing's cut out of it. It's going to be perfect to get everything in the rear of the Charger, which there isn't much left to wire on the rear of the car. So like I showed you guys, the front is all wired up. I just need aluminum in the next video, connect some grounds, and we'll be throwing the engine and transmission in. Pulled a lot of wiring out of this in the last video. As you can see, there's not very many wires that go to the fuse box anymore. So some things I pulled out There was, I believe, trailer wiring in here. I also pulled the sunroof wiring out because I don't have a sunroof. And the more wiring I could get out of the harness, the less it's going to weigh, which is going to be really convenient. And it's not going to be a huge savings, but with how much wiring there is, it's probably going to be at least 20 to 30, maybe 40 pounds of wire. I also wish I would have known that the Durangos, I don't think the Trackhawks come with it, but they come with front parking sensors. At this point, I'm not going to add front parking sensors to my bumper because then I have to drill through the bumper. It could ruin the paint. Then I have to add those grommets like I did on the other Magnum. Then those have to be painted. The parking sensors have to be painted. I'd pretty much have to repaint the whole front bumper, which I'm not going to do. Also, in the Durango, it has adaptive cruise control, which would be kind of cool. But at the end of the day, adaptive cruise control kind of sketches me out. Even though it's based off a sonar sensor, it's not as bad as Tesla. That's all cameras. Tesla used to be the best because it would use the sonar, the cameras, and I think something else. But now they just use completely cameras, which is very, very sketchy. So let's get to work on this stuff. Get the rest of the wiring out of here. Most of this wiring over on this side is going to that amp, which I'm going to locate the amp in the factory position, which means it's going to be in the dash harness, which means all of that bundle of wiring, which is really, really thick. Look at this. This whole bundle right here, let's take out these wires right here. This whole, all this wiring right here goes to the amp, which if it was located in the front, this wiring would not be here. There would not be. Look how long this is. It's at least 10 feet. Has to be. 10 feet and what is that? At least 10 wires? Well, no. 20 wires because there's two wires each. There's a lot of wire here that doesn't need to be here. So in the back, there would just literally be one wire going to each tweeter and one wire going to each. No, there isn't any speakers, so there will be one wire going to the sub, or two wires going to the sub. Lots of wires for no reason. Dodge is just wasting copper by the millions of miles a day. So let's get all of that stripped and get everything out of this and finally in the charger. So all this wiring that's left on the floor right here in the dash harness is all interior wiring. We have this wiring right here that needs to go to the fuse box, which it isn't very much. There's a lot less than there was before. I have a few wires over there also on connectors that need to go to the fuse box as well. But for the most part, this is very thinned out. What I'm gonna do is I'm going to use zip ties, zip tie everything, because one tip when you're wiring something like this, if you're gonna move the wiring harness, make sure to zip tie the bundles. So as you can see, most of this stuff I have rolled up and zip tied. And the reason for doing that is if you move this harness, and if I moved it unzip tied, it would get super entangled and it'd be a nightmare to get all back in the positions that it's going in. So this will be very convenient because the doors on the Durango are I think they're pretty much the same distance. So I think all that wiring will be, unmodified. And then, the dash plugs, I'll probably have to consolidate them because I don't need two huge dash connectors. I need to move this stereo module, the amp, up to where it would be on the charger, which is, and it's the same setup. So it should bolt into the factory charger dash frame up in the dash. And then there's a bunch of other stuff. So on the Chargers and Challengers, they have this RF hub over the back of, the trunk area. This one actually sits, and it's kind of in a bad spot on the Chargers and Challengers, especially when you're doing like a Magnum swap, because then that module is like in the center on the floor. This on the Durango, it bolts on the side, which will be very convenient on the Charger. I also have some stuff right here. This is the lock button for the door handle. So this goes up into the hatch, and you can see how much wire's right here. That's a lot of wire. So I thought it was very comical because this is pretty close to the plug right there for the hatch, and it goes into the hatch, this wiring. But Dodge ran that all the way up here and around, and then all the way to this connector that would be over here. And it was just kind of funny because I don't know why they just didn't pass it through on that side. Didn't make any sense. Wiring all day. I thought I was going to get a lot more finished, but I am making some progress. So we now have the fuse box in the engine bay. I need to make a bracket so it clips in like it would factory, and I also want to, like I said before, add that little fuse panel that the electric power steering and the fans get their power from. But I really like how this looks. We have 3 of the fuse box plugs plugged in. Almost all the wires for the engine harness and the lower body or the lower ECU plug. There are a few more that I have to add, which I need to add this one right here. It's for the shift interlock. It goes into this plug, but it has the incorrect pins. So like I've said before, I'm waiting for pins. I thought I'd already have them, but it's just one of those things. And then another thing, there are some wires down here that I have to lengthen and shorten. So there is, I think, 4 wires left in this one. And these are just multiples, so I could break the harness apart. So that'll go in there. And then there's one lonely wire that's going to go in here. And then I need to run the rest of the ECU plugs, or not the ECU, but the fuse box plugs. And I have the harness in here all zip tied together so I can stick it in the car. Like I said before, I'm not going to break this down outside the car just because it's the same orientation as it would be in a Durango. So I then can get everything ran to the fuse box. So we have these wires right here, which I still think I could break some of these out of here because I'm going to keep the heated and cooled seats, but I really don't think I'm going to keep the electric seats. I might keep it so it has, maybe, we'll see. I might have like height control, but I'd rather just have manual rails. But for now, I'll just leave all that stuff. Also, there is an inverter in the passenger seat on the Durango, which kind of sketches me out. I really don't want to have, I was thinking about keeping it, but it goes through this plug and then it says it's, you know, running 120 volt through that right there. Yeah, not happening. So also there's some heated seat controls and some USB ports, but I really was thinking about it. It would be kind of cool to have this in there, but at the same time, I'd rather the car not burn to the ground because of, I don't even know why. My truck has like super thick wires going to the outlet. But yeah, let's get the rest of these plugs in the car. And I'm going to pretty much just do the same thing I've been doing. Just run them individually. It'll go pretty quick. I now have the Durango Hellcat / Trackhawk fuse box permanently wired into the Charger station wagon. So there are a few things that I'm still going to pull out of this. This harness does look, so this is just for the fuse box going inside the car. So this does look like a lot of wiring because it's all spread out like that. But once it's loomed, it isn't going to be too horrible. What I'm going to end up doing is I'm going to keep these separate. So I'm going to keep this loomed and then keep this loomed. And there's not very many wires right here. And that's because most of the wiring that would come from the Challenger Charger fuse box, like the HVAC, and there's probably like half this harness right here would be coming from the fuse box going inside the car, isn't there. So what I plan on doing is if once I delete some stuff out of the inside of the car, like it has an inverter, which I wanted to keep so I could effectively charge my laptop when I'm on the road. But at the end of the day, I'm kind of afraid of it. The module's under the passenger seat, and then the wiring wraps around the car. So I don't want to have an issue later on. Maybe, you know, it has a short or it burns down the car. I don't want to have that issue. So I'm going to probably end up deleting the inverter, which is going to get rid of about, you know, 6 wires or so. So, and I think 4 of them are very thick wires. So if we get rid of those, and then I think there's some wiring in there for the rear HVAC unit as well for power. I didn't delete yet, but I'll worry about that once the engine and transmission are in here. We start putting interior in the car. I can start really figuring that out. But I'm going to just loom this separately, and I'm not going to put the cover on this. So the bottom of the valve cover is probably right where these brake lines are. So I'll just zip tie around this like I had it when I was wiring it, and then just have both of these zip tied in, and they'll be loomed. So they'll be protected from heat. It'll be kind of the same thing. It just won't have the cover on it. And then once I delete those wires, then I can put the cover on it if it's possible. If not, I'm most likely just going to end up making one of these, probably just 3D print it and just make it quite a bit wider than it is. So you can see how it's, you know, this side of the cover is pretty thin, and there is a lot of room between this and the valve cover. So what I could do is just make it like maybe a 1/2 inch wider all the way through, and just make it come up a little bit more. And then that power wire goes through right here. So I think that'll work out really well. But next video, we'll finally be putting the engine in the Charger wagon, which is a big accomplishment. All this wiring was just such a task. I'm just really happy that it all came out really nice. Another thing I'm going to do is I'm going to actually pull, so this is for the AC pressure switch, and I'm going to actually pull this back and then run it through the engine harness like it would be on the red eye. And then I could also run the switch for the inner chiller valve. So it's an actuator on this driver's side. So I'll do all that through the engine harness, and then it's just going to be really simple. Just pull that out, relume it. Not going to be that big of a deal. And then I could get all this stuff loomed up in the next video, and then we can get the engine in it. Need to get the oil pan on, all the diff, everything into the front subframe, and just kind of go from there. Get the steering rack in. We can get the knuckles on. I want to Cerakote the knuckles, and we have all brand new hubs, all brand new brakes. One thing I did end up deciding to do, I was going to make the transfer case harness part of the engine harness, but on the all-wheel drive Chargers, which I found out on this car, that module is mounted underneath. There's like a footrest bracket, and it's mounted to the back of that. So I'm probably just going to mimic that, because CAN bus wires already go to that module that would be under there, so I'd already have all the same length CAN bus wires. So I'm going to utilize those from the harness that I got from this red car into the blue Charger, mount that module in the same spot. I'll just end up 3D printing something, because on the Charger all-wheel drive module bracket, it has, or on the module, it has little mounting tabs, and on the Durango one it doesn't, because it just slips in. So what I'm going to end up doing is I'm going to use those mounting holes, and then I'm just going to make a piece that like slips over that the module fits into, and then that bolts to the back of that footrest bracket, which will be really nice. So I'm going to end the video here. Definitely, you guys better be ready, because the engine is going in the car in the next video. I cannot wait to finally have this thing in the car just to see it. But I'm going to end the video here. If you like these videos, make sure to click the subscribe button, throw a thumbs up, throw a comment below. As always, see you guys next time.